A pleasure to come and join us, fellow Kenyans, as we discuss these matters which are really of concern. I work in a space where we have also spent a lot of time thinking about this and speaking and presenting. And one of the questions I asked myself when I got the letter was, what more should I say? Because we have said to Parliament, but this provides an opportunity to be able to speak. I will not repeat the matters that Bilo has spoken to, but let me bring us to attention that as we speak right now, according to the statistics we have of 2021, 22 million Kenyans are below the poverty line. And therefore, when we say this, we basically, and that could have changed. In the last 2 years, a lot has changed. Incomes have not increased, if anything, and I have shared in the paper that I've presented. The incomes are actually on a negative growth. And therefore, we are not talking about some utopian institution out there. We are talking of real people. We are talking of Kenyans spread across this republic who cannot put food on the table, who now, because of the cost of the high cost of living, have to choose between medical care and school fees. And you would wonder, so should they worry about medical care now, or should they worry about the future of their children and their education and the like? And therefore, I needed to present that number. That 22 million number is an important number because then it puts a face, it puts a life of somebody in this conversation. And then the slow growth of incomes. I will not talk about so much about the cost of living because that will be the core of what I present. But one of the biggest challenges where we are is that incomes have not changed in the last couple of years. If anything, during the COVID period, and I was just looking at the budget speech that the CS read, earlier this year, there are very few Kenyans who are earning, even be above the figures that we basically increase the taxes. I think it was about 1.1%. So you have a very huge population of who earn much more, but even the incomes have not changed. And the report I'm looking at here is basically by 2021, we are on a negative 6% in terms of decline in incomes. I will not say so much about the dollar, but the dollar has a compounding effect. And therefore, let me speak to the things that we think are critical for us to think about. Public debt and debt servicing has been presented by Bilo, and I'm sure the CS will also speak. The question of in-year deficits, in other words, how deficits grow within the year, is a matter of concern. Mr. Chair, if I was just to just present and say that every year our deficit within the year has increased, say for 2021, 2022, 2022, 2023, where we had a negative 16% and a negative 5%. 2014, 2015, we had a 99% increase in deficit from 367 billion to 732 billion. The year we are talking about, 2022, 2023, 2024, this current financial year, as per the supplementary budget published last week but one, we already have a 20% increase in the deficit from 720 to 864 billion. Unless we rein in the deficit problem, we will still continue to run with a public debt problem that we are unable to manage. And this is important because when you look at the trend, these are changes that happen within the year. Mr. Chairman, if our revenues are not performing, why should our expenditures increase? Why don't we rationalize our expenditures? I want to confirm to this honorable team that I don't think we have a revenue problem. Every year our revenues have been growing year on year, an average of 10%. We have a spending problem. And somebody who is struggling with Fuliza, Tala, branch does not need more money. Needs a behavior change. And therefore it is important for us to rein in. Because what we are doing is that we are borrowing more and more and more. But where are we borrowing from? When you look at our debt currently, it's at about 50% each in terms of domestic to external. The debt servicing that we are paying, just one step behind, that whereas our debt is big, our biggest risk exposure is within the domestic market. Mr. Chair and co-chairs, I think this is a matter that we are not having a conversation on. This year alone, we expect to raise a revenue of about 2.5 trillion Kenya shillings. Let me bring it down. We expect to raise about 250 shillings in ordinary revenue. Our consolidated fund services, which includes pensions and constitutional expenditure, is 278, so 200 shillings. I'm just using average, it's 2.078 trillion. Out of that, our debt repayment is 1.86 trillion, 186. So do the math, 250 minus the 200, which these are non-discretionary expenditure. So they basically, it's a must pay, it's a must spend. Of that 180, 100 is to the domestic market. Now, why is the domestic market important? It is because a lot of that borrowing has been on double digit. 12%, I think the last coupon I saw was at about 15%. In other words, we are highly at risk because with all that money being held by government, what it has done is that government basically is competing with private sector, with private individuals in the domestic credit market. That is important because when you read the story of what has happened in Greece, in Argentina, recently in Ghana, then it is the domestic market, the famous haircuts, were taken in the domestic market. But why is it important? If you have only, and if you add appropriations in aid, it's another 400 billion. So basically 290 shillings in my simplified figure. What you're saying is that teachers alone will cost you 400 billion. In other words, if you just add teachers' salaries to the consolidated fund services, all the money in ordinary revenue is gone. You've not even paid for military costs. You have not done transfers to devolution. And therefore, I want to suggest to this honorable committee that we have a debt crisis. And it is important that for us to have part of this national dialogue is perhaps to start having a conversation on how do we restructure. I'm avoiding the word default. How do we manage ourselves out of this situation because we do not have money to provide public services? And we have tried to analyze, because when you look at expenditure in social services, you look at expenditure to county governments in terms of the transfers we are making to county governments, everything is on 0%. It's only debt servicing that is on a higher upward trend. We have a crisis. And the earlier we accept we are in a crisis, they say the first step, after denial is acceptance.